Okay, hello, welcome back to my channel. Today, I like to think of this less as being late, if you will, and more just embracing the idea that makeup can still be interesting and relevant even if it wasn't released like last week. Also, I just have been getting around to doing this now, so but I thought I would do a first impressions today of one of the Beauty Bay palettes, as you know from the title, but I bought 3 of the 16 pans, so like the green, the earthy, the berries, and the midnight, I believe it's called, palette, and I was going to do them all together, but I think I just want to give each one its own separate video. So today I'm going to use the Earthy palette. This is the first one that I'm trying. Look at this beautiful little green color story. I feel like in a lot of ways I've gravitated away from monochromatic palettes, as I think a lot of people have, because they have been so overdone in the past, but this I love. I feel like all of these have done, or all Beauty Bay with all of these palettes has done a really good job in having, you have light shades, but you also have depth and kind of like a range of tones, a range of depths, which I always appreciate. And I don't actually know, aside from Melt Smoke Sessions, that I have an entirely green monochromatic palette, which is a little bit crazy for me considering how many palettes I have. So let's just give her a little swatch on my arm. Should I zoom in a little bit? Just a touch. Okay, so let's just start. So the first shade is the shade Fresh. I read that initially as the shade Flesh. It's not, it's Fresh, which is a really beautiful shade. I really love this. It's like a minty, sea foamy color. Then we have Ivy, which I believe is in the Wilderness palette. I will do swatch comparisons of the Wilderness palette and this at the end of the video. Then we have Satellite, which is the first shimmer. Oh my god, look at this. This is so, it's like a taupey green almost. Like a mossy taupey green. That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. Then we have the shade Cobra, which is another matte. I don't even really know how to describe this. So I won't try. Okay. And then we have the shade Shamrock, which is a very bright, like yellowy toned green. We have another shimmer. This is the shade Pixie. This is less sparkly and more of just like a regular metallic. Almost has like a mintiness to it. Then we have the shade Seahorse, which I also really love. This is like a brighter mint. Like the first shade, then in comparison, the shade Fresh, not Flesh, almost has like more blue and gray to it, and this is more of like a brighter mint. The shade Moss, which I also believe is in the Wilderness palette, which is a beautiful like metallic foresty green. It's so pretty. And then we have the shade Lime, which also I believe is in the Wilderness palette, but it's a really beautiful like bright lime shade. I'm not honestly mad that those are repeat shades. And we have the shade Acid, which is a yellow toned green. I love shades like this. The shade Sage, again, not super sparkly, but this is a deeper forest green. So Moss has almost more blue to it, and Sage isn't quite as sparkly. Then we have the shade Pine, which is a Another matte. It's almost like a deeper version of Shamrock. Then we have Eucalyptus, which I believe is also a shade from the Wilderness palette. It's like a mossy green matte. The shade Kava is absolutely gorgeous. It's a beautiful, like bright, shiny champagne. It's so bright. The shade Pickle is another like grungy yellow toned green. Love. Not swatching the best because I have moisturizer on, but. And then the last shade is the shade Palm, which is a beautiful gold with almost like a green undertone. So this is the palette swatched out. I love it. I think it is so beautiful. Again, love the choices of metallics, and I love the range of depths that we get with the mattes. Amazing. And there's no beige, which is always a plus. Okay, so I'm going to do some up-close swatches like I typically do with first impressions. As always, inspired by Lauren May Beauty. I will leave her channel linked down below in the description box, and then we can do a little look. So I think I'm going to start with the shade Fresh because I just think it's such an interesting shade. I've primed my eyes using the NARS Smudge Proof eyeshadow base, and I have not set my lids. I believe that this is supposed to be the same formula as Beauty Bay's newer palettes. I saw some people when these were releasing that it was the old formula. I don't know if that was like posted somewhere or whatever, or if it's just because the older formula palettes had the beauty, like the bee stamped in the pans, but it feels like the Beauty Bay palettes that I have tried. Yeah, and I mean, it's, look at that. It's performing like Beauty Bay shadows typically do. No complaints from me thus far. So I'm gonna take the shade Shamrock now, which is this really bright green. And I'm going to do a two-toned crease. I'm gonna take this just on the outer corner and then halfway through my crease. I love that shade. Ugh. I have not been having the best week, as seems like most of my weeks have been going that way, so I just needed some makeup time. And then I'm going to take the shade Pickle. I love the name of that. And I'm gonna put that in the front part of my crease. If anything looks like if this part of my eye doesn't look very blended, it's because this eye has like, it's really dry, my eyelid, so that's not the fault of the shadow. Now I'm going to take the shade Ivy, which is a repeat shade, I believe, from the Wilderness palette. I will do, like I said, comparison swatches at the end. I'm just going to take this to deepen out my outer corner and my crease. So I'm going to take this all the way through. And then I'm going to take each of the brushes that I used for each of the separate shades. So this is the one with Shamrock, and just blend the edges of Ivy out. And then taking the brush that I used with Pickle. You know what? I think I'm just gonna go ahead and do a cut crease. So I'm gonna do a half cut crease. I'll cut my lid and then I'll be back. Okay, crease is cut successfully. So I'm going to take a little bit more of Shamrock and just make this transition a little bit better. And then I'm gonna take that a little bit on, like a very tiny amount, over the edge of my crease, and do the same thing with Pickle, very lightly. And then I'm going to take Ivy and deepen my outer corners. And very carefully run this over the edge of where I cut my crease. My plan is to put Sage in the center of my lid and Satellite, yes, Satellite on the front part. First though, I'm going to take some NYX glitter primer, put this all over the area where I cut my crease. Oh, I feel like I said this shade was Sage. It's not, it's Pixie. I'm taking the shade Pixie and putting this in the center. And yeah, these definitely, this shade and Sage are the two like regular metallics. They're not like the really sparkly, like textured Beauty Bay shades, although it's still like a really nice metallic. And then taking Satellite, putting this right in the front. Okay, really nice. Now I'm just gonna do that on the my other lid. We love. So I'm taking just a touch more of Shamrock and blending this into Pixie on my lid. And then I'm gonna take Pixie and Satellite on my fingers. Look at these beautiful shades, and intensify these shades on my lid. This is like the best, I don't know why I've suddenly lost my voice. This is the best way to get Beauty Bay shimmers to their full potential, is using your fingers, I find. And then I'm going to take Fresh, which was the very first shade that I used, on a little blending brush, and just blend this over the edges to bring that tone back and make sure that everything is nice and blended. And then I also think I'm gonna take a tiny little brush with a little bit of Ivy. Just stamp this close to the edge of my cut crease as well. I find this just gives like that extra little bit of dimension and crispness. For my lower lash line, which I almost forgot that I have to do, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna take Shamrock because I really enjoy this shade, and I'm going to just run this all underneath my eyes. And then I'm going to take Ivy again and deepen my lower lash line. To blend down my lower lash line, I'm going to take the shade Acid, which is more of a yellow toned green. I kind of want to like tie in the green that you can barely see in the front part, and I feel like this might bring it more in that direction. Or not, I don't know. Just kind of playing around. Yeah, I don't know if that really did anything, but that's fine. It's gonna look good regardless, I feel. And this is giving me St. Patrick's Day. Like this specific tone of green now that's under my lower lash line. That's funny. And then I'm going to take the shade Palm, I think, right here, and put that right in the front part of my lower lash line. And then I'm gonna take Kava, the champagne shade, and put this on my, oops, as I smack myself in the face with my brush. I'm gonna put this on my inner corners and give that a little spray. I think this should probably be bright enough. Oh yeah, that is good. The base of this color is a little bit deep for my inner corners, but the shine on it is quite strong, so I feel like it works. Maybe I'll put a little bit of that on my brow bone as well, just to see how it goes. And then I'm gonna take the Book of Magic palette, and I'm gonna take the shade Hex, just to use as my black because the Wilderness palette doesn't have a black, and just deepen my outer corners with this shade. Okay, I'm gonna leave it here after putting 78 eyeshadows on my eyes, and I'm going to finish up my face, put some lashes on, lips, you know, all that stuff, do my hair, and then be back to do some swatch comparisons. Okay, and this is the finished look. It's later in the day, so that's why if I'm looking a little bit shiny, that's why, but hopefully I just look radiant and dewy. On my lips, I have the NYX lip liner in Espresso, blended out with the NYX Suede Matte Lip Liner in Sandstorm, and the ColourPop Creme Lipstick in Butter. Hopefully it looks blended. On camera, or in person it does. On camera, you know, it's always, you never know how it's gonna go. So I thought that I would do some swatch comparisons between the Earthy palette and the Wilderness palette, because this did come out like in replacement of this, essentially. They didn't bring back the Wilderness palette, but they wanted to get all the people who bought the Wilderness palette and that they knew would also buy this one, like myself. So this is what the two look like. I just dropped that face down and all the shades look like they're okay, so whew, my life flashed before my eyes. This is what the two palettes look like side by side. So obviously the 16 pan one doesn't have any of the like red tones or blue tones really. It's pretty much just like the middle like this row and half of this row expanded because it doesn't have any like blue tones really at all. So I thought that I would swatch some of the shades that are like exact repeat shades and then see if any of the other shades in the Earthy palette are similar to shades in the Wilderness palette. So let's just start like through the palette. So the first shade that is essentially exactly the same is Ivy. So this is from the Earthy palette and this is from the Wilderness palette. So I mean, maybe slightly different actually. The Ivy from the Wilderness palette looks like a touch deeper. But tonally and like color wise, they look pretty much the same. Like you wouldn't probably be able to tell the difference on the eyes, I feel. Then we have Moss, which is a metallic. So again, top is from the Earthy palette, bottom is from the Wilderness palette. Again, these shades look exactly the same. I don't think there's really any difference between these at all. And then we have another shimmer, which is the shade Lime. So this is from the Earthy palette and this is from the Wilderness palette. Again, is there any differences? Not really. Yeah, none that I can tell anyway. And then the last shade is the shade Eucalyptus, which is a matte. And I'm doing like the same amount of swipes and everything in the pan. So this is Earthy, this is Wilderness. Yeah, those look pretty much exactly the same. The only like true difference that I could see is maybe between the two Ivies. But other than that, all the other shades look pretty much exact. So let's see, I'm gonna go through the Earthy palette now and see if there are any corresponding shades to the Wilderness palette. So Fresh, there's nothing like it. Ivy I've compared. Satellite, I don't really think there's anything like it. And then I'm going to compare this shade here called Cobra to the shade Forest from the Wilderness palette right here, just to see. So they look pretty similar. So this is Cobra and this is Forest. So they're actually quite similar. Like I would call that almost exactly the same shade, to be completely honest. Okay, interesting. So next shade is Shamrock. I don't really think there's anything like this in the palette. Then we have the shade Pixie, which I'm going to compare to the shade Breeze right here from the Wilderness palette. They're definitely different formulas. Breeze is more of the like sparkly Beauty Bay formula. So this is Pixie and this is Breeze. So these are quite different. All right, next I'm going to compare the shade Seahorse in the Earthy palette to the shade Mint from the Wilderness palette. So we have Seahorse and Mint. So Seahorse and Mint. Again, pretty different. Seahorse is definitely a lot lighter and brighter. I might switch to my other arm actually now. Just move over a little bit. So now let's see. So Moss I've compared. Lime I've compared. I'm going to compare now the shade Acid from the Earthy palette to the shade Leaf from the Wilderness palette. So again, top is Earthy, so this is Acid, and this is Leaf. So not quite the same. Acid is definitely a lot lighter, like a lot lighter than Leaf. All right, so there's really nothing that I'm going to compare to sage or pine. Eucalyptus I've compared. Now I'm going to compare the shade Kava to the shade Ray. I don't think they're going to be similar. Ray is, I think, going to be lighter and more green, but we'll just see. So this is Kava, Ray. So we have Kava from the Earthy palette, and Ray. Yeah, they're not similar at all. Let me swatch Fossil now from the Wilderness palette. But Fossil's darker than Kava, a little bit more bronze. And then now I'm going to compare the shade Pickle from the Earthy palette again to that same shade Leaf that I compared before. So this is Pickle and this is Leaf. So these are also very similar. Leaf is maybe has a little bit more yellow to it, but they're quite similar. And then finally, I'm going to compare the shade Palm to the shade Fossil from the Wilderness palette, which I did not show you, which is right here. So lastly, we have Palm, Fossil. This is Palm from the Earthy palette, and this is Fossil. So more similar than Ray and Kava are, or Fossil and Kava are, but Fossil still is warmer. Palm almost has more green to it. All right, so these are the comparison shades between the two palettes. So definitely if you have, I would say the Wilderness palette, you have a lot of the shades, of the green shades in the Earthy palettes, or definitely shades that are very similar. I'm not mad at it. Like, I generally kind of use my palettes, like, I don't always view them as like singles, you know what I mean? So like, I'm more than happy to use this palette by itself and then the Wilderness palette by itself or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't super bother me, but if it's going to bother you, or you were just curious, like maybe you already have the Wilderness palette and you really only use the greens, or maybe you're not even really into greens, or you know, if you were just curious about the comparisons, this is what I have. Obviously the Wilderness palette has the blues and the oranges and the reds, so it definitely has more variation, but I feel like they've kind of taken the best of the greens from the Wilderness palette and put it into the Earthy palette. I am very excited to use the other palettes from this little range, or like the other two palettes that released with the Earthy palette, and I'm also excited to do a 3 looks 1 video with it. I believe, as far as I understand, that these palettes are permanent in Beauty Baseline. I'm pretty sure. So you can get them still. It's not like limited edition and then it's gone forever like the Wilderness palette and these other palettes were. Let me know if you picked these up. Are you kind of over it? Are you over monochromatic palettes? Are you just like not really into buying it? You know, maybe you already have the Wilderness palette. Let me know. Let me know if you enjoyed this video or anything that you would like to see from me. I upload videos Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and sometimes Sunday, although sometimes I'm inconsistent with that, but I typically always upload at least 3 videos a week if you want to keep in touch with me. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I would love to see you in my next one. Bye!